Presenting a project of mine on the South African boat-based bottom fishery. I myself am a part of this fishery, and this study conducted a baseline assessment of the knowledge, perceptions, behaviours and attitudes of recreational boat-based bottom fishers in East London, South Africa, and compared it with recreational boat-based bottom fishers in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Recreational boat-based bottom fishing is a very popular activity in South Africa. It provides employment and social benefits, but it also puts pressure on vulnerable fish stocks that are already shared with small-scale fishers and commercial fishers. Traditional management measures like bag limits and size limits are often poorly enforced and do not necessarily address issues like barotrauma or poor handling practices. This makes it important for us to understand how these anglers relate to this fishery. So these are some of the species that are typically targeted in this fishery, and those are the dusky and silver cob, or mulloway as the Australians know it, daggerrod, 74, red stumpnose, copper stemras, geelback, Scotsman, yellow-belly rockcod, red Roman, Santa, carpenter, and poenskorp. And as you can see, most of them are threatened. So the management doesn't depend only on the biology of the fish, it also depends on the people that interact with the fishery. Angler behavior like compliance with rules and catch and release practices can strongly influence stock survival. In South Africa, unfortunately, compliance with rules is low, with nearly 50% of anglers admitting to breaking the rules. Baseline assessments are a first step to help us understand how these anglers think, perceive and behave in relation to this fishery so that we can tailor interventions effectively. The overall aim of my study was to conduct a baseline assessment of the knowledge, perceptions, behaviours and attitudes of recreational boat-based bottom fishers in East London, South Africa. And my first objective was to conduct this using surveys. The second objective was to compare my results with a very similar study conducted in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. So, survey was constructed on Question Pro and distributed via a clickable link on club WhatsApp groups. It contained open-ended questions, long and short form answer questions, Likert scale questions as well. And it was split into 4 different sections: stock abundance questions, catch and release questions, management authority questions, and a very short section on demographics. Port Elizabeth and East London were compared and visualized using 100% stacked box plots, bar graphs, and salience indexes. So, a total of 52 anglers answered the Port Elizabeth survey and 37 anglers answered the East London survey. Both groups had a high proportion of skippers, and when we asked them how many days do they fish from a ski boat per year, Port Elizabeth had a slightly higher fishing effort, with the majority of East London anglers fishing for less than 20 days a year. Then we asked them, based on their opinion, how abundant are each of the following species in their areas. And in Port Elizabeth, 8 species were considered abundant, and carpenter, red Roman, and yellowtail were considered common. In East London, 9 species were considered common, and daggerrod, 74, and copper stemras were considered rare. Then we asked them, based on their opinion, how much do they believe these stock numbers may have changed over the past 10 years? And in Port Elizabeth, geelback, Scotsman, and stockfish were considered to have decreased, and 8 species were considered to have remained unchanged. In East London, cob were considered to have decreased, 8 species were considered to have remained unchanged, and daggerrod, especially 74, and copper stemras were considered to have increased. Then we asked them what do they believe is the main cause for the declines that they have seen, and both regions overwhelmingly identified commercial fishing, IUU fishing, and overfishing as the main causes. However, East London also identified recreational fishing abuse, such as not sticking to bag limits or size limits, poor catch and release practices, and competitions that do not enforce catch and release. Then we asked them what do they think is the main causes for the increases that they have seen. And Port Elizabeth didn't have too much to say on this topic. However, East London identified the benefits of the MPA concept, producing spillover that supplements their catches. And they also mentioned anglers tending to try and change their mindset to be more conservation-minded. Then we asked them what do they think are the main threats to these bottom fishing stocks, and again, both regions overwhelmingly identified commercial, IUU, and overfishing as the main threats, with East London again identifying recreational fishing abuse. Then we asked them, based on their opinion, how important do you believe catch and release is to maintain sustainability of this fishery? And there was considerable agreement from both regions that it was highly important to maintain sustainability. Then we asked them, at what depth do they believe a fish will be affected by barotrauma? Port Elizabeth put the depth threshold at 20 to 40 meters, and East London put the depth threshold at 30 to 50 meters. Both regions, however, also mentioned that barotrauma onset is both species, size, and retrieval speed dependent. Then we asked them, at what depth do they believe there are no benefits to using specialized release mechanisms to release fish with barotrauma? And Port Elizabeth suggested in less than 30 meters of water, there are no benefits to using specialized release mechanisms. And in both regions also suggested that beyond 60 meters of water, it's completely unnecessary to use specialized release mechanisms to release fish with barotrauma. Then we asked them, based on their opinion, how much do they believe that the use of a downrigger or a venting needle affects the chance of survival of a fish with barotrauma, and there was considerable agreement from both groups that both measures considerably increase the chance of survival of a fish with barotrauma. Then we asked them, what percentage of fish do they think survive after being released without specialized release mechanisms and with specialized release mechanisms? And both groups showed that when no specialized release mechanisms are used, post-release mortality is considerably higher. Then this is where we started seeing some of the greater differences between the two regions. When we asked them what specialized release mechanisms they use, 39% of Port Elizabeth anglers use no specialized release mechanisms compared to only 11% in East London. 60% of East London anglers use some form of a downrigger compared to only 18% in Port Elizabeth, and 63% of East London anglers were familiar with the concept of venting compared to only 33% in Port Elizabeth. Then we asked them to indicate on this picture of a red Roman where they would insert a venting needle to degas a fish with barotrauma. And Port Elizabeth, roughly 33% got it in the correct spot. 60% put it in the general muscle area, which is not where we really wanted. And about 7% put it in the mouth area where the inverted stomach comes out when they have barotrauma. And we don't want people venting fish there. East London, about 56% put it in the correct area. 38% put it in the general muscle area, and about 6% put it in the mouth area. So it seems that East London tends to have a bit of a better idea where to vent a fish that has barotrauma. Then we asked them what hooks do they prefer to use most of the time, and in both regions, J-hooks were the dominant hook type. The question was asked a little bit differently between the two surveys, but it still showed that J-hooks is the dominant hook type, and that circle hooks that considerably reduce gut hooking being much less represented. Then we asked them how much do they agree or disagree that the management authority effectively manages the bottom fish stocks, and there was considerable disagreement from both groups with the statement, with 45% of the East London anglers strongly disagreeing with the statement. So my results show that East London recognizes a wider range of threats, including recreational fishing abuse. Barotrauma knowledge is broad and venting is often misapplied. Catch and release support is strong, but it is sometimes practiced incorrectly. East London uses more release tools, but the dominant hook choice of J-hooks is still problematic. And above all, there is serious mistrust and doubt in the management authority. So, a few possible management interventions that we could implement is we could have clubs like East London that seem to have a bit of a better idea how to release fish with release mechanisms, educate other clubs like Port Elizabeth at interclub competitions on how to do it correctly. We could host workshops on the practical demonstration of downrigger use and correct venting. We could approach our national boat-based bottom fishing team and promote circle hooks to these anglers. We could also educate anglers via social media posts, because everyone's on social media these days. These are just a few interventions that we could implement, but what's important is we to implement them and then do follow-up surveys to see if there's any evidence of angler reform in these anglers. I would like to thank the Safer Lab for helping me with this project. I'd like to thank both DIFS and Rhodes University for having me as a student. I'd like to thank the WRFC for giving me the opportunity to present, and I'd like to thank both Mr. Mark Steinhobel and Mr. Stephen Taylor, the two chairmen of the East London clubs. Thank you.
Very interesting talk. Got a few minutes for questions, actually, 5 minutes for questions. So you went very quick.
Yeah.
So, anything from the floor?
Yes?
Thanks, that was a great talk. Have there actually been any kind of studies that have investigated post-release mortality of these border issues?
So I don't know it off the top of my name, but Gqeberha has told me before about some of the studies where they did on red Roman, where they actually put cameras down on downriggers, watching the fish go down, and by the time they're down, they kick themselves off the downrigger mechanism. And I don't know about like percentage survival, but it does seem to improve when you use these release mechanisms.
Any questions from the floor? I've got a quick one in the intro, Hermi. So, you said there's quite a difference between East London's knowledge and Cape Elizabeth, but they're not too far away. Like,
No, they're not.
with social media and so on, are there pages that they'd all follow that could be used as a source of knowledge transfer? Or?
So I think I understand your question. So maybe the possible reason, two possible reasons why East London seems to be a bit more knowledgeable about the releases is, first of all, the Port Elizabeth study was conducted in 2018. The East London was conducted last year. So East London has had quite a bit of more time to be exposed to social media like interventions. Another possible reason also is that East London tends to fish predominantly deeper waters. The continental shelf is much closer to at East London than it is in Port Elizabeth. So they deal a lot more with barotrauma than Port Elizabeth does.
And does the government put out any educational videos?
I'm not sure on that, but our department has done a few interventions like signs, if you saw on the last slide, that we put up at scuba clubs to show them where to vent.
Any other questions from the floor?
Yes, Carl?
So just following on from that, I was wondering some of the differences between the clubs, like membership numbers, how big clubs are, and turnover rates within the clubs. They have high turnover rates. You would expect there wouldn't be. I mean, you're paying a lot of money for your ski boat. So you're probably going to be a member for a long time. I was just wondering.
So I don't really have an idea of like the number of people, but in Port Elizabeth there was only one club that was given surveys, where in East London there was a total of like 3 clubs, because there's a lot of scattered clubs in East London, and the only real 2 main big ones is in Gqeberha and the East London Ski Boat Club. The rest are small, only adding up to members of maybe like 20 members. So I have no idea about how much turnover there is, but I think the Port Elizabeth Club is a bit larger, but East London accounts up for that in the amount of clubs that they have. Yes.
So, thanks for the talk. When you were analyzing the surveys and everything, do you think there are questions that you could have added or
So
from the surveys?
there was definitely some we removed, but I only put the most relevant questions on this talk because I only had so much time. But there's quite a bit more questions regarding the management and catch and release that couldn't make it into this talk because they were not as relevant as the ones that I had to put in.
Is there anything you would add in the future?
I think what made it a little bit difficult is when we made the survey, we didn't really look a lot at the survey that was done in Port Elizabeth, so it made analysis a bit difficult. So we had to kind of modify both to agree with each other to show the differences. But I think that we can, from here on, if we want to do follow-up surveys, do more a standardized version. This is what the survey should look like. This is the general questions we should ask.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, Hermi.
it's a pleasure.